We're ready to go. All right, good evening, everyone. It is 5:04 p.m. Before I call the meeting to order, I will ask everyone to please silence cell phones and other electronic devices and remind council that our procedure bylaw prescribes the use of such things during committee meetings. It's 5:04 p.m. I'll call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole for budget purposes to order. And as we begin this meeting, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe of the Ojibwe Nation, represented by the people of the Alderville First Nation. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. As we discuss the budget today, we commit to fostering mutual respect and understanding in our partnership with Indigenous communities. And the agenda for the January 15th Committee of the Whole meeting is before you. Could I have a motion to accept that as presented? Councillor Wright? Councillor Rowley? It's okay. Discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. Members of the council, have you any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. Although we probably won't be talking about grants in aid this evening, I will note that the Hilton Cemetery is on the list, and the Hilton Cemetery is owned and operated by Trinity St. Andrews United Church, of which I am a member of the board. So should any conversation of that grant in aid come up, I will be recusing myself and turning the chair over. There are no delegations this evening. Are you aware of any citizens' comment? Thank you. It brings us to staff reports with regard to the first 2025 capital budget. This is our first look at the budget book, and we'll be discussing an overview of the capital budget this evening. I'll turn the microphone over to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have the document in front of you, so my intent is just to begin to go through that and give you a bit of an overview, and staff will be here to answer questions. As the Mayor mentioned, this is the first draft of the capital budget. Back in September, Director Whitfield had provided you with a report that sort of outlined the budget guidelines, so we've identified some of that in the executive summary, and some of these are highlighted throughout the document, specifically things like the finance strategy for the future wastewater plant upgrades, the increase to the capital levy, the financing strategy for the fire and ambulance building. So some of the bigger items. Ultimately, this budget, and you will see the numbers, which also incorporates the operating budget. So this budget reflects a budget increase of 10.48% and a tax increase of 7.67%, or $962,000, $962,938. Every 122,403 equals 1% budget increase, and 125,607 equals a 1% tax increase. Noting some of the accessibility related projects, paved trails, trails with accessible components, one-stop accessible counter at 35 Alice, those are also incorporated in this capital budget. Assessment growth is identified here as well. So the assessment growth came in at $320,423. And ultimately, any budget increase above $12,560,741 will represent a tax increase in 2025. Moving through to the budget timetable, this was approved on Monday, just a revision to what had originally been approved. Tonight, we will talk about the capital budget, the 29th, the operating budget, and then the all-day meeting on the 7th, at which time I will have, we're expecting that we will have some direction on where council would like to be, what projects you would like to have in, potentially ones that are optional for 2025. And at that time, I will ask the directors or managers of each department to come back and do a bit of an overview overview for you of what was presented tonight and what they've come back with as an alternative for, as direction from council. We felt doing that on February 7th might also allow for that new council member to then hear from each of the directors instead of doing it this evening. In addition, we'll have that grants and aids presentation, should we need it, on February the 7th, so we can talk about that tonight as well. The tax rate comparison, just outlining each of the other municipalities and where we fall accordingly. The next page being the budget and tax increase. So again, as identified, the difference between the budget increase versus the tax increase based on the assessment growth. What the budget increase is, the difference removing the growth, and then the actual tax increase as proposed. Page 6 just breaks it down to show you the budget increase of 10.48%, and again, that tax increase of 7.67%. The next page being the summary of reserves. This does indicate that development charges study, which is underway, and we are progressing with that, and we expect that that will come back to council, I believe, February 3rd. But we have had discussions with Watson, and they are just about complete. We have one more piece of consultation that's occurring, and then they will have that done along with the water wastewater rate study. So page 8, the estimated activity for development charges. Is my page 8 your page 8 as I'm saying this? Yes, we're good? Okay. The reserve fund, page 9, your internal loan schedule with 2025 specifically highlighted for you. Again, if there's questions specific about this that I can't answer this evening, we're happy to take that back and come back to council. If there's anything as we go forward with regards to the larger projects or process, most of the stuff I feel as though I'm fairly comfortable with. If there's background numbers you're looking for and how we got there, I probably will redirect you to our deputy treasurer. The external debt listing, just to give you an idea of where we're at and how long those loans are in place for, and the interest rate accordingly. The water department loans, wastewater department loans, and the total loans. Some of this in here, talks about the loans that we have internally as well that we have borrowed against ourselves, just waiting for the interest rate to go down, and that can be revisited once we see some of those interest rates come down a little further to determine whether or not there's a more efficient way to borrow the money. And again, page 12, your total borrowing. I will note too, in the total borrowing, we have the full amount for the wastewater treatment plant. We're well aware that if the funding doesn't come through, that number will be reduced dramatically. And the borrowing for the fire station as well, we'll look at ways that we can fund that should we be in a position that we have to. The annual repayment limits, this really is just an outline from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the limits for each municipality. Where we are currently and what we could continue to borrow. Page 14 gets into an overall of the budget and specifically what is tax supported. So a lot of this capital budget is actually carryovers or reserves. As we go through, we'll want to be mindful about what is actually tax supported if you're looking for savings and whether or not it's a project that you will actually realize those savings. I will note just under the capital budget, the general government capital expenditures, that 100% change is actually 244.86%, and you'll see that in the actual general government page. I think just it didn't tally on the Excel spreadsheet. And then page 15, at the bottom again, you're looking at the this says 7.66. I think it was just a rounding, should be 7.67. Overall, on page 16, the capital budget provides an increase of just over 52,000 or 2.99%. over the 2024 capital budget. Again, a lot of them, as we've gone through, are carryovers. So there's not a lot of additional projects that have been added that are actually tax supported. They will include things under general government, fire, public works, parks and recreation, planning, economic development, water and wastewater. It does include the upgrades of the lineal infrastructure, including the roads, the storm sewer systems, the water plant and distribution system, obviously the wastewater plant and the collection systems, buildings, vehicles, and equipment. The road infrastructure, this is, I think, a chart that's been provided historically, where we're at. I'll highlight just the annual kilometer goal of what we look to do being between the asphalt and the surface treatment, and we're in line with 2025 and the expectation. Page 17 is just a snippet from the asset management plan, reviewing the useful life based on the surface treatment. 18 does show the infrastructure gap, and we're going to need to be creative as we move forward in how we fund some of the things that we need to get done. But we'll work to do that and ensure that we keep up with all of the things that need to be completed. The vehicles and equipment, again, we're working through that with our fleet and trying to ensure that we are upgrading as we need to. The attachment, I believe, was included at the end of the report on the current fleet list. Maybe I'll just pause because that's a lot, and just a brief overview to see if there's anything that we need to capture before we go on.
Members of council? Councillor Wilden?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. The infrastructure gap seems to refer almost exclusively to roads. Does that number doesn't include wastewater, I assume?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would agree at this stage.
If we flip back to page 16, the third row says 2024 roads proposed. I assume that's 2025. It was just a pickup from last year, I assume. Okay. And on page 6, we'll probably talk about this at the external budget stage, but I see this as increase to PSB. Of course, we know that there was a significant change from policy change from the government of Ontario to help reduce it to that level. Is there a plan for us to factor in the future increases?
Yes, you, Mr. Mayor, there is an additional, so that $173,000 is actually made up of $83,000, which is the increase based on the reduction they provided us, and an additional $90,000 to be put into reserves to offset the increase in 2026.
Thank you. So that's included in that number?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carry on, CAO.
Thank you. It's probably a good time too, as we catch that 2024. Director Whitfield did an amazing amount of work on this before she went off, and I'm very thankful for the document that she provided. There was a few things that we needed to go through to update along the way, and the Deputy Treasurer and I worked through the document. So there may be things in here that if you catch, please point them out to us and we'll be sure to correct them. We also know, with any budget that every day things change. So we already know where some changes will have to be made, but we felt that with the document that had been provided, we'd move through with this, and any changes we'd bring back after we had that direction from council. So the general government, it looks like a significant increase at 244.86%. It's not a large budget, but the items are there. Both Candace and Danny are here to answer questions. I'm happy to answer questions as well. I don't know if you want me to go through all of the narrative there. I think they're fairly self-explanatory, but if there's questions, staff are here to answer those questions.
Questions from members of council? Councillor Wilden?
More an observation, I guess. A lot of these things look like long-standing projects that we've been talking about for years. So glad to see them finally moving forward. And we've kind of been saving up for this, so I'm not concerned.
Any highlights on the fire department? Or shall I just ask council if they have questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Members of council, we'll flip over to pages 20 and 21. Any questions or comments? With the exception of a $13 million new build, it's actually a fairly lean budget, Chief. I'm flipping over to page 22 for health services. Questions for members of council? Councilor Rowley?
Thank you. Because it looks like a fairly fire sale cost, $1,000 only for the stampcrete to go around the new columbarium seems fairly cheap.
Manager Hallam, would you like to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, that is the additional cost for this year for the top coat. It was done from last year, so it's the remaining from last year's project.
Thank you both. Turning to pages 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27 and 28 for Public Works. Questions from members of council? Go ahead, Councilor Rowley.
Thank you. Just once again, the electric charging stations, I'm assuming that's still dependent on whether or not we get any grant funding.
Manager Gooding.
Through the mayor is correct.
Thank you both. My only concern is that we are proposing 0.5 kilometer of asphalt roads this year rather than our annual goal of 1.65. And I note that there's a bit of a quid pro quo with regard to the surface treatment roads at additional 0.5 kilometer, but I always worry that those expensive roads, the asphalt roads, will get left behind and then cause us more problems in the future. So I'm just curious what the plan is to ensure we don't get too far behind, knowing that we're already behind.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So, yes, we are behind a little bit because asphalt costs keep increasing, but we've been looking at other alternatives. There's been a couple of materials that, for example, something called Everlife that might be a more cost-effective way of doing these roads. So, at this point, with the rehabilitation, we're going to be monitoring it and to see where we're at with it in the sense that every time that we're doing a minimum maintenance, we're looking at these roads, we're ensuring if there's any kind of cracks, spider cracks, anything like that, deep potholes. And if there's anything really pressing, there's a couple off the top of my head, Little Lake Road being one of them, that we would see those other alternatives.
Thank you. Anyone else for Public Works? Pages 29 and 30, Parks and Rec. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions. One regarding justification for an enclosed trailer for Parks and Rec, and also trail construction and renovations. What trails and how many are we looking to construct and renovate?
Enclosed trailer first.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The enclosed trailer was to be used for traveling with our mowers enclosed, as opposed to taking them out each evening and putting them away into the shop, as well as we can utilize it for moving tables and chairs, providing a little more storage for event use, with them staying inside the trailer.
And the question on trail construction and renos.
The trail construction renos is actually carried over from last year. So this would include the trail through Peace Park, Wallace Street Park, and Castle Ridge Crescent Trail.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So these are just all carryovers then, nothing added this year?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you both. But I thought I saw, oh yeah, Wallace Street Park is on here as a separate line item as well. Mr. Gooding?
Through the mayor is that's for the trail and stormwater improvements in Wallace Street Park. And the intent is to create an asphalt pathway between Wallace Street and Raglan where the park connects.
Thank you for that. So I guess my next question would be then, is there, going back to Public Works, is there a intent to create some sort of crosswalk there?
Through the mayor, yes. However, we have a design for a crosswalk on Raglan. However, it's budget dependent.
Understood. Page 31, 32, 33, planning and development. Sorry, planning, building and bylaws. Questions from members of council? What's the pickup truck all about?
Mayor to council, just on the matter of the pickup truck, the change in the vehicles being used by bylaw is part of a larger fleet management program overseen by the manager of operations, Danny Planetsky. So he might better speak to the bigger picture on that, but generally the idea is to swap vehicles. The current vehicle used by bylaw would then be used by the manager of infrastructure and his locate staff person, etc. While bylaw would then get a new vehicle with a small pickup, so that when he's dealing with illegal sign pickups and things like that, that there's a place for storage and a place to carry some bulk that the bylaw enforcement officer sometimes needs to do. It would not be an extra vehicle.
Thank you for that. Could you add on to that, please, Manager Platansky?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you. Looking at the overall fleet plan, we're looking at different things. So for example, utilization rates, space, fuel, a number of things. So with bylaw and building, a lot of times in the wintertime, they would need that four-wheel drive. Those big electric signs that we use for speed notifications are quite large. So to try to jam that into a hatchback may cause some trouble. So we figured having a mid-sized pickup truck where they can utilize it in a safe regard with four-wheel drive, a little bit more space, tools, signs. If they got to go on a construction site, for example, if the inspectors, the CBO or the deputy CBO has to go on a construction site, they're not having any issues, with an electric vehicle. So with the mid-sized pickups, we figured that it would be a better application.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wheeldon?
Thank you. Pleased to see $80,000 for the Environmental Advisory Committee. Is that related to the formation of the Community Integrated Sustainability Plan?
That's correct.
Wonderful, thank you.
Anyone else? 34 and 35, environmental services. On the Prince Edward Street reconstruction, there's $2 million earmarked in here. Is that for the full 2 years, or is that just this year's portion?
Through the mayor, it is for both years. However, we're still receiving estimates on, and I'm sure next year we'll be coming back as we get actual numbers.
And where is that $2 million being drawn from? Is it tax support, or is it
Through the mayor, maybe the CAO can, or Keith.
CAO?
Through Mr. Mayor, potentially the deputy treasurer might have it.
Deputy treasurer?
I feel like this was reserves, but or grant funding, not tax support.
This might have been a carryover from last year. I believe we did have this budget last year.
Thank you. You're on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 1,075, $1,075,000 is from DCs. We'll be funding that 2.1, and the other balance is bear with me here. Sorry about that.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I believe in your binder it indicates
Yeah.
ECs and reserves.
Yeah, it's the last spreadsheet
Yeah.
on the capital page 5. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's DCs and rate support. Borrowed, no? Reserves? That's not what I'm reading. No. I'm reading down here. So we have under wastewater, it is 2. Oh, I see. I'm looking at a different project entirely, I think. Okay, under wastewater, I think I need this cleared up for me. Under wastewater, it says Prince Edward Street reconstruction 2-year project, $2,080,000. and it's equally split between reserves and DCs. If I go down further, water distribution capital, Prince Edward Street, reconstruction 2-year, $2,150,000 being equally split between DCs and rate support. So what's what there? We got $4 million in here. Some coming from DC, a lot coming from DCs, some coming from reserves, and the good people on the system are expected to pay for just over $1 million. So I'm curious what are we talking about in terms of project here? And I'm not saying it doesn't need to happen. I just want to get clear what we're doing.
Through the mayor, for the scope of the project is for the wastewater, we're replacing the sanitary and upsizing it once from I believe a 275 to a 350 to 450 diameter pipe. So I think that's why partially it's funded through DCs. And then with the water, we're upsizing the main from a 300 to a 350.
So one's water and one's wastewater, and that's all part of the infrastructure work being done when Prince Edward Street gets it.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. The booster pumping station underwater, is that whereabouts is that?
Through the mayor that's on Dundas Street. We'll say just beyond the police station to the east.
Go ahead.
Is that associated with the long-term care facility?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, did they not say they were going to pay for that?
Where's that? Where are we getting the money to provide that? $500,000 coming from DCs and $500,000 coming from tax or from rate support.
Did I remember that correctly?
Director Walsh, can you chime in here on what the proponent of the long-term care facility is planning to help pay for?
Yes, the Omni long-term care plant will basically be paying for their share through their development charge. And the booster pump station will be coming out, as you've described, mostly through rates, if I recall correctly, and DCs. So it's going to be it's a piece of infrastructure that was faulty, and it needed to be replaced for the past several years. I've been told, and so and there'll be a lot of people benefiting from that booster station. So initially, we felt that we made the request of Omni to maybe front-end finance the infrastructure, but that wasn't doable from their end. And so with the advice of the Director of Finance at the time, that we could come from DCs and through rates. So Omni, I haven't calculated their DC charge yet. It'll be based on the number of suites, but the building permit alone will be around $380,000. So the DC rate, I can advise council. We've got the building permit design drawings in not too long ago, when we're reviewing it concurrent with the site plan that needs to be also subject to our review and approval. But I can take a look at the building permit designs and see what the DC contribution will be at the point of issuing a building permit. Is beyond the scope of the discussions of the budget, I suppose, but the new development charges that there is expectation to defer the payment over a number of years. But Omni will have that discretion because municipality does have the option of charging an interest rate, and they may choose not to be subject to that interest rate and pay it all up front. But we can get those details to council if that's of interest. And I think there's going to be more coming to council on that interest rate when we do the DC bylaw update.
Thank you for that. I think council would like to see what that looks like when the time is right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank
Do
you.
that.
Any other questions on the environmental services budget?
Sorry, just need some.
Councillor Wright?
So I just would like some clarification. So on that line, under the booster pumping station, those lines, DC charges, 500,000 is coming out of the DC charges or development charges. And then the 500,000 number that's under the support, that's a tax support, or would that be a ratepayer?
It'll be ratepayer support,
Okay, so
those
that,
people on the system.
okay, so that then should come out of that line? Is that what I'm thinking?
You know, that's suggesting that that's how we're budgeting it. So we would be budgeting it from the monies received from the ratepayers. And is it true that we can only use $500,000 from DCs for that project? I'm not sure who needs to answer that question.
Am I still on mute?
You are not.
Okay. I think the sources of revenues are through the DCs, but also through the water rates, of course. And because there's a broad level of usage of that booster station, then we may have to look at how many connections there are, how many users there are, and look at how much is that coming out of the water rates. And the rest would be an area-wide development charge. And any shortfall would come from the overall tax base, but predominantly will be the first two sources.
Thank you for that. So who does that booster station, what areas of the community does that booster station provide water for? Is it just up Dundas Street to Georgina at the moment?
Through the mayor it would go from Dundas Street north to Georgina to Hardy Lane, and then as we'll say Dunnett lands develop, there'll be portions of that will benefit as well.
Okay. So how long do we anticipate? I don't know how old this booster station is. How long do we anticipate that $1 million will last us?
Through the mayor the design is a significant upgrade to what we have now, and it should last 50 years of maintenance or what. It's a permanent station.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you. Appreciate that. So I guess the other question I would have then is, will future development help recover the cost of that over time? Or is that just the cost of doing business in terms of putting this booster station in? Director Walsh, are you able to answer that?
Through the mayor to council, I'll tag team Manager Gooding on this one, but the DC, every home that has a DC paid will be contributing to that booster station. It will be an area-wide DC. It won't be an area-specific DC.
Thank you for that. Go ahead.
I'll just add to that through the mayor this booster station was identified in a 10-year capital plan, and the existing station, if I can describe it, it's in a ditch below grade, susceptible to flooding. And I would say every other year we have a pump die that has to get rebuilt and whatnot. The new station is going to be above ground with dual services, so you have dual pumps, perhaps a generator. It's going to be a significant upgrade from a maintenance and reliability than what we have now.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I grew up on top of that hill, so I can tell you we would lose water about once a year or so. Anything else on environmental services? Go ahead.
Looking at the list of vehicles and equipment, I love how many excellent condition I see on here. That's wonderful. But I also see a lot of 5 years of expected useful life. 5 years from now, are we going to have to replace a lot of vehicles?
Manager Blatansky?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that depends. It depends on a number of factors, and one of them being, again, the utilization rate. So if we have a vehicle, for example, we have a Kona right now that has maybe 11,000 kilometers on it. But then it also depends on the availability. For example, when they had the Chevy Volt out, they built it in 2018, 2019, they discontinued it. Then it was very hard to get those parts afterwards. So it just depends.
Go ahead.
I also noticed that the EVs on our list do not have a useful life. Is that because there isn't a sort of standard established for those?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. It's a very new car. When you look at it, it literally can speak to you. So we're definitely monitoring it and watching its performance and seeing what kind of things are, for lack of a better word, going on it. And so far, so good. The only negative thing I would say about any EV is the availability of the charge in the wintertime. We lose a little bit less.
Still on vehicles or equipment here? Go ahead, Councillor Rowley.
Okay, so not looking at this list here, but just kind of taking the number of trucks that we're buying, and they're not all described as what they are, but 4 trucks that we're buying, one at 75, one at 90, 2 at 60. What's the difference for all of them? I know the EV is different, but if there's concerns with that, why are we even getting one?
Manager Platansky.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so it varies. So with the mid-sized vehicles, they're a little bit less. Those mid-sized vehicles, so compared to a half-ton or a three-quarter ton, wouldn't cost as much. So that's where you see where that 60,000 is. The EV truck, there is I think it was last time I checked, a $13,000 rebate on it. So that lowered that cost. Ford F-150 Lightnings, they had a bit of a recall on them. And after fixing the recall, pretty much they built so many of them, they want to give those discounts now to kind of get them out the door.
Any other questions? That brings us to the end of our report. CAO, do you have any final comments before I don't know what we do next.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think at this point, if the projects have been reviewed, if there's anything that council is adamant they want to see, we could probably go through that just so that staff can capture that. If there's anything that you feel is unnecessary in this budget, I think we'd like to hear that as well. It is a 2.99% increase, so it's fairly nominal, but the overall increase being 7.67, maybe an idea of where council wants to be, so we can start to work towards that. And I think the only other item that we were looking at, as I mentioned, is the grants and aids, and if we're going to change that process, because it is a policy in place, so we would need council direction if we want to change how we handle that this year.
Okay, let's talk about the grants and aid first, because I think that's an easy one, and Councillor Wielden had an idea about how we might want to handle that this year. You mind speaking to it again, Councillor Wielden?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. We don't usually do a consent agenda in Brighton, but I know a lot of other municipalities do, where they have a list of correspondence or things like that they deal with all at once with staff recommendations. And if a member of council wants to pick out an item from the consent agenda, then we're able to look at that one more specifically and then deal with the rest as a whole. I know there are certain expenses that are always there, such as the cemeteries, and even to a certain extent, the healthcare. We've started bracketing out the healthcare related expenses. And we've had a lot of discussions around this table about how much the burden of healthcare is shifting to municipalities, and that's a shame, but nonetheless, we want good services available for our residents, et cetera. So it seemed to me that while we tend to spend about a third of our time on the budget looking at 1% of our budgeted expenses, we might be able to make that go a little bit quicker, particularly this year since we are a little bit shorter on time, by doing it consent agenda style. What do y'all think?
Members of council? Councillor Wright?
I guess it kind of comes down to what everybody's thoughts are about different lines in the grant and aids. Councillor Rowley might have a completely different idea about one line and I another, so we could still end up pulling out a fair bit of it to discuss anyways. So I'm not sure that doing the consent agenda is going to be as efficient as we'd like to hope it would be.
Councillor Rowley?
Thank you. I want to agree with Councillor Wright on this. I think there are some that require discussion. So, there's a few that we can certainly pass over, some of them, but I think there are ones in there that I think with some significant increases do require a bit more discussion than just kind of rubber stamping and moving on. I'd like to keep the discussion there.
Okay, so nice effort. But we're back to the way we've always done it. So I guess I'll ask, go ahead. Steve.
So then through you, Mr. Mayor, what we will do then is we will reach out as per the policy to anybody that's $5,000 plus, I believe. They are required to make a presentation to council. So we will reach out to them and then we'll ask them to do that on the 7th. And then council can have the discussion at that meeting with regard to the grants and aids.
Councillor Wright.
Also in regarding to grants and aids, I do understand that Gift from the Heart has moved from Brighton and are now located in Quinte West. So it's not it's probably a non-starter in our list to begin with.
We will discuss that more, but I appreciate the comment. I'll ask that question when we actually get to grant and aid. We're dealing with capital or overall budget. So I guess I'll ask this, if we're going to ask staff, which we will, to go back and take a look at the budget, are we comfortable with the 7.67% tax increase? Or is there a number that we would find more tolerable? Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. I always try to approach this because I know that my gut feels comfortable with numbers, but numbers are abstractions from reality, and I think we can do better than abstractions. And so I tend to try and approach it from the perspective of what do we need to do an excellent job? What do we need to maintain the current standards, which may already be excellent? And what could we get away with if we really couldn't fund it? And typically we work our way down to that anyway, and staff manages to be incredible and keep us going no matter how low our increase is. But that tends to be the way I approach it. Now, I did get some feedback from a resident today. They reached out asking when our budget was going to be ready, and I said, well, we're working on it tonight. But I asked them, where's your comfort zone? Would you rather have a lower budget increase this year with the expectation that we're deferring some costs to next year and we're going to have a higher increase next year? Or would you rather have big investments this year that might mean a lower budget increase next year, but a bigger one this year? Or would you like us to try and find that middle ground? And I've been around a few budget tables, not even just this one, and I find that people tend to say, well, that middle ground is around 5%. Well, it might be, but I don't know that I want to. I don't know that I want to say, well, let's pick a magic number. I want to say, where can we make sure that we're not deferring costs that are going to cost us more in the long run? Because sometimes investing today means saving a lot tomorrow. I think about if we had implemented the Kyoto protocols in 1993, how different would our budgets be today? Certainly Los Angeles would have a different budget today. So I don't want to fall into the trap of saying, okay, well, we just need to get it down to something. I was on the budget committee at Lower Trent, and we had a lot of hand-wringing and 3 different rounds presenting the budget before the board. And it came down and down and down because we wanted to get it under a certain number, and the number seemed extraordinarily high. But the Lower Trent line item in our budget here is an increase of 0.018%. And so all of our scrimping to get it down to a magical number around that table made a negligible difference to this table. And so I want to keep these relative things in perspective and focus for outcomes rather than comfort zone. And I guess that's why we make the big bucks, to make the hard choices.
Thank you for that. And just by way of information, the county has passed its budget at 6.2, 6.3%, somewhere around there. You have a different number? I stand to be corrected. It might be almost 7, yeah. But in order to get it down to that level, because 4.5% of that is financing of the Golden Plough Lodge project, period. And that's, not cost overruns. That's just the cost of building a long-term care facility, which the province requires us to do. In order to get it down to that 6.8-ish level, we've had to forego the 1% dedicated infrastructure levy and the 1% dedicated housing levy. So that's what we're giving up at the county in order to keep things under that, 7% level, which I think in order to make things tolerable, we have to do that. But at the end of the day, what does that mean? What is that going to cost us tomorrow? We don't know the answer to that question, of course, but we know it's not zero. So is there direction to staff? Are we okay with 7.7% increase? And I guess I'll ask this question of staff. Is there stuff built into this budget that could, if need be pushed off to another year, or is there? I'm not going to ask if you've padded the budget, because I know that doesn't happen ever, but are there things in here that could tolerably be set aside?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have looked through the capital budget, and as I mentioned, a lot of that is coming out of reserves or DCs. There isn't a lot of room to pull back on some of those things, and some of the minor ones wouldn't have a huge impact. There certainly are some things that we have already talked about, and we didn't make changes because the director of finance had done this budget. She had all the numbers working, and as soon as you change one number, it was changing through the whole thing. And the binders were being printed, and I said, we're just going to present it as it is, and then we'll discuss. So we likely are going to come back and say the renovations for the council chambers is probably going to have to wait. We've already done a little bit more of the investigative work, and we talked about just getting drywall and getting rid of some of the paneling, but the sound and the impact that will have is going to create some additional costs that I just don't think we want to put in this budget. So from a capital perspective, we probably will pull that out. The capital budget, there really isn't a lot of additional items in there. In all fairness, the operating budget, the deputy treasurer and I have not gone through with a fine-tooth comb. We got through the capital to get this here this evening. Just in looking, though, at what had been done and outlined some of the areas where the increases are, some of the significant increases are costs of staffing, and that is due to the collective agreements that were adopted. So there isn't a lot of room there. Can we come down a little bit? I'm sure we can if, council wants to see a bit of a reduction. But I don't feel like there is a lot in this budget that is over and above. And anything that we have incorporated, I feel has already come to council. We've already had the discussion about what we're looking at doing for next year. So there shouldn't be any surprises.
Councillor Wright.
One of the questions I had for Mr. Puffer yesterday, and we were chatting about it, is in the grants and aid line in the 2025 budget, there are placeholders. So that doesn't even have the actual 1% of our budget in that line. So that's not really reflected in our percentage right now either. So I would like to see at least what the 1% of the current budget is put in that placeholder so that we have a better idea of where we're at so that we can move forward from there. If that's at all possible, please.
Right. So the 7.67 does not include grant
right.
and aid. And
Yeah.
grants and aid are typically another percent or so.
Yeah.
So we're looking at eight, almost 9% now.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that maybe staff should go try to dig a 1% out?
No, I'm saying if we could have the 1% of what our current budget numbers are based on this first draft tucked into that placeholder line so that we know that, in and around that number that we're working. And that number would shift a little bit as we possibly whittle down.
Can we do that, please?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Deputy Treasurer and I did identify the fact that it was not incorporated in there. Again, not wanting to change too much of the document because knowing that that flows all the way through, but we certainly will come back when we discuss that operating budget to give you an overview of what that impact would be. And I think the percentage, I don't have it in front of me, but you're correct, it's 1 point something%.
It's 1.5% of the previous year's tax levy.
It was 1.5,
And I think
okay.
with the requests that we have here, we're $21,000 over that. So we're not too far off with $183,000 in requests or something. So, but we'll come back with those numbers so that you have them for sure.
But again, that 183 is not incorporated into that 7.67% tax increase. So that all has to be factored in as we move it forward. Do we wish to provide any direction to staff? Or go ahead.
Just an idea that we had talked about around the Lower Trent board is that might make it helpful for the public to understand which parts of these increases are outside of our control. For example, the Police Services Board or increase to policing, that's not negotiable. And that's 1.41% on its own. So to highlight, this one. We can't change that. If we highlight all the things we can't change, we get to see what we're actually making decisions about.
Can we get that report at the next meeting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a specific overview of what.
The untouchables. Yeah.
Yes, I think we can list those for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Even if we were to move forward at an 8% tax increase, we're still nowhere near the next in line for Northumberland County for their tax levels. I'm not going to shame anybody or call anybody out, but we would have to almost double. We'd have to almost double that in order to get to the next. So we're still number 3 and the lowest, third lowest of across the county, and we are the third largest in population, and density in terms of our urban environment. So, not suggesting we should do that, but I think it's an important metric. Councillor Wheeldon.
Just to add to that context, I was hearing today that even the City of Toronto has a 7% increase this year. Typically, they keep theirs under 2%. So people often come out here and tell us how high our taxes are. And by comparison, yes, that's one of the benefits of density and things like that. But we're hearing from across the province, and have been as long as I've been at this table, that costs are being downloaded and inflationary pressures are higher for municipalities than for households and all of those things. So if even Toronto has a 7% budget, if we have an 8% budget, that looks very good by comparison.
Indeed, although 8% makes me queasy, so. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. But we need to be reminded, this is just our first look at this book.
Yeah.
I'm quite willing to leave things as they are and until we have a complete picture of what we're dealing with. I'm not ready to shave 1% or 2% off yet.
Councillor Wright.
Sorry, just also wondering if anybody, and I know it would all be speculation at this point, but in the next week or so, the political environment of the world is changing yet again. And we're going to have some heavy influences that are going to be hitting Canada, which will obviously trickle down to us as well. I'm just wondering if anybody has any insight. I'm sure Mr. Fredis would have had some significant insight into this, but what those impacts might be for us in terms of costs. Like we know through COVID, so much of building supplies skyrocketed. And so I wonder what some of these potential upcoming changes are how they're going to impact us here.
I think I said this at the last meeting, but the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, when he was at the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, said if the 25% tariffs go into place, it'll make the downturn in the economy of COVID look like a walk in the park. If we saw 16% inflation on construction materials for municipalities, we're going to see at least that. over and over again, which is going to impact everybody's pocketbook. So I don't know if anybody else has any other factors to other than my anecdotal stuff, but I think that's all we can deal with at the moment, and hope that cooler heads prevail. The new province of New England will help us out, I'm sure. Everyone, are we okay letting this flow through and seeing what happens at our next meeting? All right. CAO, do you have anything final before we head out?
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, just so that we set the expectation then for the 29th, we will come back with what is in your budget books. We will identify the list of things that are untouchables. We will identify the impact of the grants and aids. But just so you are aware what you have in front of you, you can review in preparation. And we will also have some conversations and as we go through it to see where there might be some areas that we can reduce. But when we come back on the 7th, then we will have each of the directors go through formally if there's any changes. Like I said, I already know where there's a few things, so they can itemize those. And then any specific direction at that point, or any direction, sorry, on the 29th, hopefully we can come back and be in line with where you'd like to be. So if there's any questions in the meantime, or when you see it, please reach out to me. I may not be able to answer it right away, but certainly between myself and Keith, we'll get the answers for you, so we're prepared.
Thank you for that. Is there anything further from members of council? So the motion reads that the first draft 2025 budget book be received for information. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Wheeldon, seconded by Councillor Rowley. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. Brings us to question period. Is there anyone in the gallery who has a question with anything on regards to tonight's agenda? Mr. Green.
Now, thank you. For the record, David Green. The Director of Finance often gave us the blended rate. And is there any sense of where that is headed at all?
CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Green. Your blended rate, are you speaking about the county and
Usually education,
Yeah.
yes.
We can only hope education is going to come in at 0 again. My quick Google search said the county was 6.12. So we should have something, I would hope, but we can definitely use, even if we assume that the education is 0, we can come back with that at the next session as well, just to indicate where that would fall if we stayed with the 7.67 and just outline those percentages for you. Absolutely.
Thank you. Another question, if I may.
You may.
I noticed that Councillor Butwell is not available to attend today's meeting. I just wondered if she offered her regrets. Thank you.
Anyone else with a question for today? We have nothing in camera. It is 6:07 p.m. I'll adjourn this committee of the whole meeting with my thanks to everyone.